Welcome to Finlos Lives. So this is the second episode where I am exploring memories and other aspects of how I have mourned the loss of my mother over the past 20 years. And I thought this episode would be interesting to explore some of the specific details that I still retain from our time together. And so as I move through, I do apologize if this feels a little bit like a list, because it kind of is. I thought it would be an interesting exercise to identify some of the key traits or aspects or qualities that I still retain about my mother by exploring the different ways that we spent time together, or the different things that she sort of talked about or enjoyed doing. So I think this is really kind of a way of me bringing her back from dormancy, I think is a good word for it, where she has sort of been present in my memory, but as something of a inactive figure, especially in the past couple of years. So this is really a practice of me rebuilding her as I remember her. It's not necessarily the truest version of the person that she was, because I don't know if I ever really got to see all of that person. But this is the version of my mom that I got to know. This is the version that she gave to me. And I think it's worthy of this recollection. So, who was Linda? Of course, she was my mother. But what were some of the things that she enjoyed in her life? And more specifically, that she enjoyed doing with me and with others. My mom was a lover of movies. Specifically, she actually really loved going to the movie theater. I have lots of memories of seeing movies with her. I think I saw Home Alone, the original Home Alone, with her. I saw Lethal Weapon, I want to say Lethal Weapon 3 with her in the movie theater. I saw Batman Returns with her. She took me to see the Naked Gun, the sequel. What was it called? 2.5, the Naked Gun 2.5. And in a risque move on her part, she took me to see Bram Stoker's Dracula, the one with Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. And I remember her, doing the responsible thing and having me close my eyes when there was nudity, but she was okay with me going to see the movie. And I think she always just loved going out. I think that's really why she loved going to the theater. It was just an easy way of getting out. And I think one thing that I've come to really learn about her was that she liked to be doing things. And for people like us who were not particularly wealthy, the movie theater was sort of a fairly easy way of getting to do that. And she also liked to have different types of movie-going experiences. I remember there was one time she took me to a dine-in movie theater. This is when we were seeing The Naked Gun, and it was like a restaurant movie theater. It's a full-size screen, like you're going to a movie theater, but you sat at little tables and you can order food and they would bring it to you, and it was a really cool experience. And some of my best memories of my mom are of watching TV, or watching, more particularly, movies at home. We would rewatch movies a lot. She was always drawn to similar stories, and so I can remember sitting on the sofa, and there was one year where we watched Ace Ventura, the original Ace Ventura movie, and The Hunt for Red October. Like, that's such an odd pair of movies, but we watched those movies back and forth repeatedly for months, and it was just a really good way of spending time. We didn't have to talk, we didn't have to do anything. I just rest my head on her lap and we'd watch movies. She was also a really big fan of comedy, and there are two shows in particular that I remember watching with her on TV. Anything by Gallagher. She loved watching Gallagher, and he was a very eccentric, long-haired but going bald, bearded man, or a mustachioed man who liked to smash watermelons with his hammer. Like, that was how the climax of every show is he would just smash fruit with his big hammer. But his comedy style was sort of like this anti-political, working class, whatever, you know. He kind of wasn't exactly the most funny thing, but my mom just liked watching him smash stuff. But I think her favorite comedy act, and I have a very soft spot in my heart for this, and it's really hard given recent facts that have come to light, but Bill Cosby. She loved watching Bill Cosby, and the name is escaping me right now, so I'll have to think of it later, but there's just one comedy show in particular. It was himself, Bill Cosby himself, and I could just watch that over and over again, and it makes me think of her every time. And again, it's too bad that Bill Cosby turned out to be, well, Gallagher actually did too, but Bill Cosby really turned out to be a scumbag. But man, that show just reminds me so much of my mom. And another interesting memory relating to my mom and movies, she loved horror movies. Strange constellation of interest, but I think some of the first movies I ever saw with her were scary movies, and classic scary movies at that. And the first one was it was The Shining, and The Exorcist. That was the other one that she loved that we watched together. But I remember The Shining. I remember, again, sitting on a sofa. I think I might have been 5 or 6 years old watching The Shining with my mom, and having my very first panic attack. It's funny to think about now. I remember just keeping my hand on my heart just to make sure I wasn't like dying of fear, but then like I couldn't tell if my heart had stopped beating, and oh man, yeah, for sure, my first panic attack. Thanks, Mom. I still love that movie though. So I think I just have a really positive experience around enjoying television and movies, especially with my mom, and going to the movie theaters. And I think it was a way that she was able to escape a rather challenging, difficult life that she had, for lots of different reasons. But, you know, who doesn't like a good story? What else? She loved the sun. She loved being outside. She loved gardening. She loved sunbathing. But most of all, she really loved being around water. She liked being at the beach and being on boats, although she had a very strong fear of fish. But she still loved being at the beach and at pools. And a lot of that, I think, came from, she had very specific ideas of what beauty is, what beauty was for her. And for her specifically, being tanned was like the pinnacle of what beautiful was. And so every weekend, I mean almost every weekend, when she was in Florida at least, I just remember her putting on one of her tiny little bikinis and going into the backyard and lathering herself with like SPF 3, the basically oil, and she always had a good tan. Something that she just really took joy in was being outside and getting sun. And she loved gambling. I think, at least the one that I remember the most, and maybe the one that she partook in the most, was bingo. she was a big bingo fan, and I think maybe as I go along here, I'm gonna put together some themes, some consistencies. But she loved going to the bingo halls, and there's a couple different times where we lived in towns with particularly active bingo halls. There was one period in my life when we lived on an Air Force base with her then husband, and she would go and spend whole days at the bingo hall. You know, you spend your $5 a game, and you just hope to use that big bingo dauber and get your ink and win the big prize. And sometimes she did, and sometimes she didn't. But she just loved being there. She loved being with those people. So gambling was a big pastime of hers. She loved poker, and cards in general. Actually, she enjoyed playing cards. She loved rummy and solitaire, but gambling. So poker was a game that she was really good at. She liked to do that, and slot machines of all things. She would go to these little dive bars, and whatever town she lived in, she would always find the dive bar with the slot machine. And you know, it's not Vegas, but every bar has its own house rules about how they would do payouts, because you know it's not legal to have a gambling machine, but they still did it. And she would go to the local dive bar and drop a 20 and just keep the beers going and keep pulling the handle on the slot machine. Sometimes she'd come home with a stack of quarters and she'd be so excited. Oh man. And she was a prankster. She really loved making jokes. She was mischievous. My brother was scared of snakes, and I remember in one of the many houses that we lived in, he was visiting, and she put a rubber snake beneath the toilet seat and scared him to death. And she did the same thing there in a different time, different place, different house, similar prank. There were a ton of us living there with her. This is when I was in, it was middle school, and one of my brothers was living with us with his then fiance, and my sister was living there. So there was 5 or 6 of us in the house, but there's one bathroom, and she was always up first. But everybody gets up and goes to the bathroom, and one by one she got us all. She put a rubber frog in the toilet bowl so that one by one each of us would get up, and I was the last one to wake up, and I think I had it the worst. I froze and I fell back against the door and I couldn't speak. I was so panicked by lifting up the toilet and finding the frog in the toilet, and she just laughed and laughed. She had such a good time with that. What else? She loved thrift shopping. We were poor kids, and she struggled with consistent work and money throughout most of her life. There's ups and downs, but she was always on the search for a good deal, whether that's Goodwill or the Salvation Army. She loved to go to flea markets. She loved yard sailing, and yard sales are not what they used to be. This is a little bit of a tangent here, but yard sales are not fun anymore. I think the internet has kind of changed the way that people yard sale now, at least on the buyer's side. From people trying to sell stuff, you're always just trying to sell your stuff. That's never going to change. But yard selling just isn't fun anymore, because the people who show up, they are looking to buy in bulk just to resell online. So it's not what it used to be. I don't know if my mom, if she were still around, if she would enjoy that anymore. But she would get up and she'd get the newspapers, and she'd find all the yard sales that were going on nearby, and we'd make a morning of it, and she'd give each of us a couple bucks, and she'd have, we'd make a day of it. It was always a treasure to be found. And then I think I don't know if I'd call it fond memories, but very strong memories. Again, when we lived on this Air Force base, I'm putting together these memories and just realizing how unstable some of these situations were, because she was moving around so much, and sometimes we were with her and sometimes we weren't. But dumpster diving, she had recently moved in with her Air Force husband, and they were just recently moved onto the base, and so they needed to furnish their house, their townhouse. And because people are coming and going so frequently on an Air Force base, she would go out and just drive through the neighborhoods looking for the furniture and the clothing and whatever was left behind by the families who were being deployed someplace else. And the dumpster diving mentality is something that's never really left me. Whenever we call Eva and I, we call them curb alerts now, because you post them on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever to your social networks, to your friend groups. Like, there's a curb alert, but it's still just dumpster diving. It's just whenever I see something on the side of the street, that my mom's voice in my head is like, we could use that. That'd be great here. She wasn't always there, but when she was, she always showed up. I started playing baseball when I was in second grade, third grade maybe. And, when she was in town, which was, it was a lot of the time, it's hard for me to quantify a percentage of my life that my mom lived in the same town as me. But when she was around, she always came. And it wasn't just me. She never missed a performance. 4 out of 5 of us kids were musicians at some point or another, with middle and high school band or orchestra, and she never missed a performance. In my high school play, when I was the lead, I was Romeo, and Romeo and Juliet, she came to all 3 of the performances and didn't miss a single one. And God, that always meant so much to me. As tough as things could get between her and my dad, and when things were not great with some part of the family, with my siblings or something else, it would be awkward and it would be hard, but she never let her own discomfort get in the way of being with us. She would suck it up and be there with my father, or if she was fighting with a sibling, she would show up, and she would still host Sunday breakfasts, and so that was huge. She was great with numbers. I don't know if she ever finished high school. I want to say that she did not, but she was amazing with numbers and with arithmetic, and her whole life she was an accountant. And I'm trying to think of a job that I'm aware of where she wasn't a bookkeeper or an accountant or doing something with numbers. She was amazing. Some days she would bring home her counting machine from whatever job she was working at that time, and I would just watch her, and she'd have stacks and stacks of receipts and expenses, and she would have to, for whatever reason, do these long calculations, and then she'd look back on her little paper strip to make sure that it was done right. And she was a blur. It was amazing the way that she was able to do that. And she also used it to win at poker quite a bit, and she was awesome at solitaire, like numbers. It was just part of who she was. I keep going back to these memories where we're watching TV or watching a movie, and I would be resting my head on her lap or something like that. And it really means, I can really see that she was a physical person. And I'm almost certain that one of her love languages was physical touch. She was not very verbally affectionate. I don't have a lot of touchy-feely conversations that I can remember with my mom. We talked, but that's not how she showed her affection. But she loved hugging and snuggling, and especially tickling. We used to have these tickle fights. They wouldn't end until somebody was in tears, and it was usually me, because I'm very ticklish, and my mom knew all of my weak spots, and she would sit on me and keep my legs from kicking. She would just tickle me until I cried, and that's how she showed that she was in a good place. We would just lay on her bed and just tickle each other. She also loved to dance, and when I was young, I remember she would go out on Friday nights to the local dance halls, and she would party all night. And she would come back, and she would, not directly talking to me, but she'd talk to my sister, or she'd talk to somebody on the phone about how much fun she had just dancing with the guys, dancing with these random people that she meets, and it didn't matter. She just loved it. She loved to go out and dance and party. And yeah, definitely a physical person. And like I said, she wasn't the most verbally affectionate person, but she could use her words to cut. There was never a question of her affection and her love, but she never held back how she felt. She never held in a truth, even if what she was saying was not the kindest thing. I don't know if she ever really meant to hurt. Oh, actually, I do know. Sometimes she wanted to hurt people with her words, but she had very strong opinions, and she always let them be known. And there were lots of conflicts because of it, because sometimes people don't want to hear it, and she didn't care. She's not going to hold it back. Whether it's she doesn't like the person that you're dating, or she thinks that you look bad with whatever you're wearing, or if the food wasn't good, she's going to let you know. And she did not put up with people's foolishness. That's for sure. She did not tolerate fools. She could hold a grudge, and man, was she quick to anger. There's a face that she would make where you can tell that she was about to erupt, and she would say something real slick, and it would hurt the way she said it. Then she would have this smile afterward where she's like, I'm just playing, but you know that that's not what was going on. You know that she was not playing. And another thing that I think is one of her fundamental truths was she was always ready to move. She didn't become attached to things or spaces, not to jobs or locations, maybe not even people. She had mastered the art of fitting her life into a car. She had these those big, blue or gray plastic bins that you can buy at Walmart, but wherever. Whenever she needed to move, she could always fit all of her essentials, the things that really mattered to her, into 2 or 3 of those bins. And then she'd just throw some clothes in a garbage bag and move on, She would have a yard sale, sell all the furniture, sell all the cookingware, sell all the silverware. And then she'd just move on. I don't know. She didn't have an anchor. There was never really a place for her. And in some ways that was good. She was always ready for a road trip. She would wake up one day and she'd say, all right, we're going to take a trip up to Ohio to go see Grandma and pack a bag. And literally the next day we'd be in the car driving to Ohio. Or we'd drive to see a sibling in a different city because they're going to college. And we're going to go see whoever. Get ready, let's go. And I think she just couldn't stand to be still for too long. I don't know. There's something about being still for too long that unsettled her. She was always up for a road trip. And it's hard to think about. It's hard to consider who she was. Like, I have this list, these things that I'm talking about, these very specific moments and memories and experiences. But they're like I'm trying to think of a good analogy, a good simile. They're like her clothes, you know. They how she dressed herself. These are the things that made her happy or made her angry or whatever. But it's really hard to have a sense of who she was. I don't know what her guiding ideology was. Like, did she have one? Were there a core set of principles that she had? You know, movies and cigarettes don't make a person, do they? Maybe they do. I don't know what those core things were. I mean, she was a person who always had belief, had a I won't call it a religion, and I won't call it like a spiritual practice, but she always believed in something. She used to tell stories about how she would have dreams that she believed were visions, and that she saw ghosts and spirits, and she firmly believed those things. You know, so that was something. But we never went to church. She didn't like church. Well, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I don't know. And she was open-minded about things. Like, she wasn't necessarily a bigoted person, but she definitely had some very strong biases that would play out. You know, she'd fall into very typical gender patterns and racial patterns and that sort of thing. You know, I think it would be really interesting to have conversations with her now, to talk about the things that we believe in. Like, you know, Eva and I, we have very firm, real truths that guide our lives, and that we're using as sort of core principles that we're raising our kids with. And so I'm just curious what those conversations with her would be like. So, you know, she never talked about politics. I don't even know if she even voted. She never talked about it. She didn't follow like a specific philosophy or credo. I'm trying to think, what did I learn from her? Like, what is it that she imparted to me as a parent? And whatever it was through her actions, definitely not through her words. I don't know. Maybe survival. My mom was a survivor. She would do whatever it took to make sure that she would land on her feet. Maybe she always, I think she always made sure that us kids, were tended to, even if it meant that she shouldn't or maybe couldn't be the one to do it. You know, there was never a sense she was malicious when she would suddenly up and leave. I just think that she knew that she needed something that was not here, but she always made sure that, you know, my father was ready, and that we had someplace. I don't know. Does that count? And she was never alone, or at least very rarely. And by alone, I mean single. I don't know if it was an insecurity or maybe a function of economics, or just a pleasure in being with someone. You know, maybe she was raised with the idea that a person doesn't have value unless they have a partner. Or maybe she had been raised and surrounded by so many dysfunctional relationships throughout her life that the dysfunction became normalized. Maybe she was simply afraid to be alone. I think, and this is kind of sad, but it's hitting me. I think she always had a sense that her life would be short. And even as I say that now, I think it's true. I think she always suspected that she would not live a full life. And so maybe having a partner made experiencing new things easier or more intense. I don't know, but she dated a lot and she married a lot. There wasn't a lot of time that she was alone. As I'm thinking about all of these things that I'm listing here, these sort of snapshots of this person who was my mother, I really kind of wonder at the limits of what I know of her. There are multiple periods of time in my life where years would pass without me seeing her, months without talking. Like I said in the last episode, it's not that I ever stopped loving her when she wasn't with me or couldn't be with me. But I learned to be able to pause relationships, even with her, as a way to survive the inconsistency and upheaval of an erratic childhood. She would move away to explore a new opportunity or get a new job or start a new relationship or visit or live with another sibling. And I would just hit pause. Time would pass for me. And the part of my mind where she lived would remain, but nothing would be added there. And then when I would see her again, there would be gaps or inconsistencies about who is this person? When she told me that she had cancer, she didn't really even have to tell me that it was terminal. Her smoking had been a lifetime habit, and it was almost a foregone conclusion. And we had the conversation on the phone as we lived half a state from each other. It had been weeks since our prior conversation, and then weeks until the next after that one. Our interactions skipped across the surface of my life in those last few months, as they had my entire life. Sometimes we lingered together longer. I think we may have shared time consistently for a few years when I was ending elementary and going into middle school, maybe. But only a few years. And then she would move on again. I saw her for my birthday in the middle of September that year when she told me about the cancer. And then for her birthday at the end of September. And she looked like Mom. And then I saw her in November, and she had lost her hair. And then in December, she looked 10 years older. We were still skipping time, but the jumps were on an entirely different scale now. But between the moments when we would see each other, the pause would happen again. And then in February, she died. And we buried her a week later. And in that moment, of course, I felt the anguish of the loss in the immediate sense. The raw emotional experience of being physically in contact with her as she took her last breaths. I was there. I felt it. But my rational mind trained for a lifetime to hit pause. I think it took over for much of the time after that. Even now, 20 years later, I'm taken by surprise when I remember that she is dead. Because it still feels like I'm just waiting for her to call. Tell me that she's being crazy and making a surprise overnight drive to see me like she used to. Thank you for continuing with me on this journey. I think I have one more episode left in this series. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, feel free to share them with me via social media or email me at finloslives@gmail.com, or you can leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. If you enjoyed this content, I hope you'll share the podcast. I look forward to our next conversation.